He came to fix her lights, an ordinary task for an apprentice. But when she looked at him and said, "Someone like you could change everything," he realized this was no ordinary night. She looked at me and said, "Someone like you could change everything." The bruised orange of the late afternoon sun bled across the grimy windows of the old apartment building on Crimson Lane, struggling to pierce the city's perpetual haze. It was a street that exhaled forgotten histories, where brick facades sagged with the weight of untold decades and fire escapes clung precariously like skeletal vines, whispering tales of lives lived and lost within. Caspian Thorne, 21, and still smelling faintly of engine grease, stood before door 3B, a heavy toolbox clutched in his hand. His uncle, Silas, had scrawled Elara Vance's address on a napkin, along with terse instructions about a tripped circuit breaker. "She's a friend," Silas had grumbled over the phone, preoccupied with the sputtering carburetor back at the Spanner's Rest, his auto shop tucked away on a forgotten industrial road near the old Gresham Mills. "Nice lady, just needs the lights back on. Don't dawdle, Caspian." Caspian had envisioned someone gruff, perhaps in a faded housecoat, annoyed by the interruption. The reality, when the door finally opened, was a quiet, disarming shock. Elara Vance was not in a housecoat. She wore a simple, dark blue tunic that fell to her knees over slim black trousers, and her dark, wavy hair was pulled back loosely, framing a face that held a profound, almost ethereal beauty. It wasn't the vibrant, unmarred beauty of youth, but something deeper, etched with a quiet sorrow that made her eyes, a startling shade of hazel, seem infinitely old and wise. There were faint lines around them, tiny testaments to past laughter, or more likely, unshed tears. She carried herself with an almost regal stillness, a composure that hinted at a meticulously constructed inner world, a fortress against the world's harshness. The air around her, despite the dimness of her apartment, felt cool and melancholic, like a forgotten garden after a light rain, imbued with the subtle, pervasive scent of dried lavender and roses. "You must be Caspian," she said, her voice a low murmur, surprisingly soft, like rustling silk. There was no impatience, no annoyance, only a faint, exquisite weariness that tugged at something deep within him. "Silas called. Thank you for coming." He nodded, a flush creeping up his neck. "No problem at all, Ms. Vance. Just need to get those lights back on for you." He tried to sound professional, his voice a touch too loud in the sudden, hushed space. She stepped back, allowing him into an apartment that was surprisingly spacious, if a little cluttered. Bookshelves overflowed with volumes on music theory, philosophy, and poetry, their spines worn with age, hinting at a life lived immersed in thought and art. Stacks of what looked like old newspapers and magazines teetered precariously in corners, forming accidental towers of forgotten narratives. The dominant feature, however, was a grand piano in the living room, its polished surface reflecting the faint, bruised light from the street, silent and imposing. It looked as if it hadn't been played in a long, long time. The only source of illumination was the muted glow of a phone screen she held in her hand, casting an intimate light on her fingers, long and slender, with a subtle, almost imperceptible tremor. "The main breaker is in the basement, I believe," she said, gesturing vaguely towards a narrow hallway. "The landlord, he's not been very responsive lately." Her voice held a note of quiet resignation, a familiar sigh of defeat that spoke volumes about her isolated existence. "Right, I'll just check the panel first, see if it's a localized issue," Caspian replied, trying to sound authoritative, a young man mimicking the confidence of his uncle. He set his toolbox down in the hallway, its metallic clatter echoing unnaturally in the hushed space. The apartment felt cold even for a summer evening, a pervasive dampness clinging to the air, mingling with the scent of dust and old paper underneath the ever-present floral note. As he knelt to examine the rusted breaker box near the entrance, he could feel her presence behind him, a silent, watchful shadow. It wasn't unnerving precisely, but it made his hands feel clumsy, his movements self-conscious. Every switch was down, definitely the main breaker. "Looks like the whole building's main is tripped, or at least your units feed from it," he stated, standing up and turning to face her. "I'll need to go down to the basement. Do you know where the access is?" She hesitated, her gaze distant, as if sifting through forgotten memories, through layers of time. "It's through the laundry room, I think, on the other side of the building." She pointed towards the back of the apartment. "There's a small unmarked door. It's usually locked, but sometimes it's left ajar." Her voice drifted off, a fragile thread. "Okay, no problem, I'll find it." He picked up his toolbox, the familiar weight a small comfort. The power outage wasn't just an inconvenience for her. It felt like a metaphor for something deeper, something broken within the silent walls of her home, within her very being. He felt an inexplicable pull, a nascent desire to not just fix the lights, but to mend whatever else lay in darkness. The journey to the basement was a descent into the forgotten underbelly of the building, a plunge into its echoing depths. The stairs creaked ominously under his weight, each step a mournful sigh, and the air grew heavier, colder, permeated by the damp, earthy smell of old concrete and stagnant water. The laundry room, the spin cycle's sanctuary, as a faded peeling sign proclaimed, was a fluorescent-lit purgatory of humming machines, their mechanical sighs filling the silence, and abandoned baskets of forgotten clothes, monuments to mundane routines. Beyond it, as Alara had described, was a heavy, unmarked steel door. To his quiet relief, it wasn't locked. It opened with a protesting groan, revealing a pitch-black staircase leading down into a cavernous, unseen space, a void that seemed to swallow light and sound. He flicked on the powerful beam of his headlamp, its focused beam cutting a swathe through the inky blackness. The basement was a sprawling labyrinth of rusted pipes, monumental dust-laden boilers, and forgotten relics of past tenants, splintered furniture, discarded toys, silent echoes of lives. The air was thick with the suffocating scent of mildew and something else, metallic and acrid, like old corroded wiring, a ghost of forgotten currents. Following the tangle of conduits, like following a map drawn by a madman, he eventually located the main breaker panel, a formidable metal box looming in the shadows, its surface scarred by time. It was a relic, certainly, but the switches were sturdy, imbued with a stubborn resilience. With a grunt, he pulled the heavy lever, flipping the main switch back to the on position. There was a faint hum, a vibration that resonated through the concrete floor, then a distant, satisfying click, and suddenly a wave of light washed over the apartment building's exterior, a beacon against the encroaching dusk, visible even from his vantage point in the small, grimy basement window. Success. A small victory in a world filled with larger, more daunting darkness. When he returned to Alara's apartment, the transformation was immediate and profound, as if a spell had been broken. The warm glow of table lamps illuminated the room, chasing away the oppressive gloom, pushing back the shadows that had clung to every surface. The bookshelves, he now saw clearly, were filled not just with academic tomes, but also with vibrant, dog-eared fiction, novels that promised escape and adventure. The clutter, which had seemed like chaos in the dark, now appeared to be a deliberate, lived-in arrangement, a testament to a rich inner life, a tapestry woven from memories and passions. The floral scent, too, became clearer. Distinct notes of dried lavender and rose petals, subtly pervasive, an olfactory signature of her presence. Alara was standing by the piano, her fingers tracing the keys lightly, not pressing them, as if afraid to disturb the fragile piece, as if the slightest pressure might shatter the stillness. She turned when she heard his footsteps, and a small, genuine smile touched her lips, transforming her face, chasing away some of the inherent sorrow. It was a fleeting thing, a butterfly wing of joy, but it sent a surprising ripple through him, a warmth that spread through his chest. "Thank you, Caspian," she said, her voice imbued with a newfound lightness, a subtle lifting of a heavy burden. "It's so much better." "My pleasure, Alara," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady, trying to sound nonchalant. The light, revealing the subtle gold flecks in her hazel eyes, made them even more captivating, drawing him in. "Everything seems to be working now. Looks like a simple overload on the main circuit. Happens sometimes with older wiring." She walked towards him, her movements graceful and unhurried, almost gliding. "Please, call me Ilara." She extended a hand, her touch surprisingly warm and soft when their fingers met. It was a simple handshake, yet it lingered, a subtle current passing between them, an almost imperceptible spark. His hands, still slightly grimy from the basement's dust and metallic residue, felt rough against her smooth, delicate skin. "Alara," he repeated, the name feeling strangely familiar on his tongue, a name he felt he had known for a long time. He found himself unable to look away from her eyes. There was an unspoken gratitude in them, a profound relief, and something else too, a flicker of something akin to curiosity, perhaps even recognition, as if she saw something in him that no one else had. "Would you like a cup of tea, Caspian?" she offered, withdrawing her hand slowly, almost reluctantly. "It's the least I can do." He hesitated. His uncle was probably wondering where he was. He had other calls to make, other mundane tasks awaiting him. But the idea of leaving, of stepping back into the mundane, clamoring world after this brief, unexpected encounter felt strangely unappealing, almost a betrayal of the quiet intimacy that had bloomed. The apartment, now bathed in light, felt like a sanctuary, a quiet haven, and her presence, though quiet, was unexpectedly compelling, a magnetic force. That would be great, Ilara. Thank you." He felt a warmth spread through him, a contentment he hadn't anticipated. She led him to a small, charming kitchen, bathed in the soft glow of an overhead lamp. It was surprisingly neat amidst the apartment's general artistic disarray, with neatly stacked ceramic dishes and an array of exotic tea canisters promising fragrant delights. As she moved, her movements fluid and unhurried, the subtle scent of lavender and rose petals intensified, becoming almost intoxicating. She put on a kettle, the gentle hiss of boiling water, a comforting domestic sound in the quiet. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her, acutely aware of the delicate curve of her neck, the way her hair caught the light, the graceful arch of her spine. The silence wasn't awkward. It was a companion, filled with the soft clinking of cups and the gentle murmur of the boiling water, a quiet symphony. "You're Silas's nephew, then?" she asked without turning, her voice a thoughtful hum, as if pondering a complex melody. "Yes, that's right. I'm learning the ropes at his shop. Mostly cars, but he taught me a lot about general electrical work, too. He always said understanding the flow of energy was key, no matter the machine. "He speaks highly of you," she said, turning to face him, a small teacup in each hand. The steam curled delicately from the rim. "Says you have a knack for finding the root of things, not just patching them up." Her eyes held a knowing glint, as if she were speaking of more than just faulty wiring or tripped breakers, as if she saw into his very soul. He felt the blush return, a warmth spreading across his cheeks. "He's a good teacher," he mumbled, deflecting the compliment. She handed him a cup, its ceramic warm against his fingers, a small anchor. The tea was fragrant, a delicate blend of jasmine and something subtly spicy, a taste both exotic and comforting. They sat at a small round table near a window overlooking the quiet street, its traffic now a distant murmur, a forgotten hum. The city lights began to twinkle, a cold, indifferent contrast to the warm, intimate glow of her apartment. They talked at first about the mundane, the challenges of old buildings, the changing neighborhood, the absurdities of city life, the endless repairs. But gradually, imperceptibly, the conversation deepened. She asked about his ambitions, his studies, his plans for the future, not as a polite formality, but with genuine curiosity. He found himself talking about his dreams of opening his own electronics repair shop, specializing in antique radios and vintage sound systems, a passion he rarely shared with anyone, a secret world he now willingly unveiled. She listened with an attentiveness that was almost disconcerting, her gaze steady and empathetic, absorbing every word, every nuance, as if his every utterance held profound significance. And then it was his turn. He asked about the piano, its imposing silence, about the overflowing bookshelves. A faint shadow crossed her face as she spoke of her past, a fleeting cloud obscuring the sun. She had been a classical pianist, she explained, her career cut short years ago by a subtle injury, an almost imperceptible tremor in her right hand that made performance impossible, robbing her of her life's purpose. The books were her refuge, a silent sanctuary, a way to keep her mind active, to escape the crushing silence that had followed the music. Her husband, she mentioned quietly, had been a scholar, a lover of obscure poetry, a man who had filled their lives with words and melodies and had passed away suddenly several years ago. The words were delivered without self-pity, without histrionics, but the unspoken weight of her loss hung in the air, a palpable presence, a third entity at their table. She spoke of the loneliness not with complaint, but with a quiet, weary acceptance that somehow made it more profound, more heartbreaking. She had learned to live with it, like a permanent shadow. As the evening deepened, the street outside growing quieter, the tea grew cold in their cups, but neither of them moved. The conversation flowed, unhurried, like a quiet river, touching on art, history, the fragility of human connections, and the strange, unpredictable twists of fate that alter lives forever. Caspian found himself drawn into the quiet strength of her spirit, into the exquisite depth of her unspoken pain. She spoke of how life often forces us to find new melodies when the old ones cease to play, of how even in silence there can be a profound resonance, a deeper understanding. Her words were like brush strokes, painting a vivid, poignant picture of a soul that had weathered storms, endured unimaginable losses, yet still held an enduring, quiet beauty. At one point, amidst the deepening shadows and the shared vulnerability, she looked directly at him, her hazel eyes holding his with an intensity that made his breath catch in his throat. The silence that followed was not empty, but full, charged with an unspoken understanding, a connection forged in the crucible of shared intimacy. "You know, Caspian," she said, her voice a mere whisper, almost lost in the profound stillness of the room, yet resonating deep within him, "someone like you could change everything. You won't believe who took his side. This is just the start. It gets stronger." The words, imbued with a quiet, almost desperate hope, hung in the air like a shimmering mirage, suspended in the single shaft of moonlight that had somehow pierced the city haze and found its way through the window. "Someone like you could change everything." My heart, which had been beating a steady, predictable rhythm against my ribs, suddenly stumbled, accelerating into a frantic drum solo. It wasn't a flirtation, not in the conventional sense. There was no coy smile, no suggestive tone. Her gaze was direct, earnest, and deeply vulnerable, an open wound laid bare. It felt like a pronouncement, a quiet, almost desperate hope whispered into the burgeoning night, into the deepening silence. He didn't know how to respond. The meaning felt too vast, too weighty for the casual context of a tea-turned confessional. It was a burden he felt ill-equipped to carry. He cleared his throat, the sound rough and awkward in the profound quiet. I'm not sure what you mean, Alara." His voice sounded weak, inadequate, a boy's voice responding to a woman's profound declaration. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips, a shadow of the earlier, more open one. "You have a quiet strength, Caspian, and a way of seeing things clearly. You don't just fix what's broken, you understand why it broke." She paused, her gaze drifting to the silent piano, a silent, imposing monument to her past, then back to him, her eyes holding his with unwavering intensity. "Some things are harder to fix than circuit breakers." Her words were a direct, almost surgical incision into the raw heart of her pain, revealing a truth she rarely shared. The unspoken weight of her statement hung between them, a palpable presence in the dimly lit room. She wasn't talking about faulty wiring or mechanical failures. She was talking about her life, about the things that had shattered her world, leaving her in fragments. The air in the room, which had been warm and intimately comforting, now crackled with a delicate tension, a fragile current that ran between them, charged with unspoken emotions. He wanted to reach out, to offer some comfort, some solace, but his hand felt heavy, rooted to his lap, paralyzed by the enormity of the moment. He was 21, still fumbling through the complexities of his own burgeoning adulthood, still unsure of his place in the world. And here was a woman, older, wiser, carrying a profound sorrow, looking at him as if he held the key to some hidden lock, some secret cure for her enduring pain. The age gap, which had initially been a distant, abstract concept, now felt like a palpable barrier, a chasm. What could he, a mere mechanic's apprentice, possibly change for a woman like Alara Vance, a woman who seemed to embody a universe of experience and suffering? The grandfather clock in the hallway, which he hadn't noticed before, its steady ticking a silent witness, chimed softly, indicating a late hour, drawing him back to the mundane reality of time's relentless march. His stomach rumbled, a rude, embarrassing interruption. Alara, however, seemed oblivious to the passage of time, lost in the quiet intensity of their connection. Her focus remained solely on him, her gaze an open book of unspoken longing, a silent plea. "It's getting late," he finally managed, pulling his gaze away from hers, feeling a sudden wave of self-consciousness, the weight of impropriety pressing down on him. "I should probably head out. My uncle will be wondering." A flicker of disappointment, fleeting yet profoundly visible, crossed her features, quickly masked by her customary composure. "Of course. Thank you again, Caspian, for everything." She rose from her seat, her movements fluid and unhurried, and he followed suit, the small table suddenly feeling vast and empty between them. As he gathered his tools, the familiar weight of the wrench and wire cutters a grounding, comforting presence in his hands, she walked him to the door. The dimness of the hallway outside the apartment contrasted sharply with the warm, intimate glow within. The air, which had been still and charged with nascent emotions, now felt thin, almost sterile, as if the magic of their connection was dissipating in the harsh light of impending departure. "Caspian," she said, just as he reached for the doorknob, his fingers brushing against the cold metal. Her voice was barely a whisper, a fragile thread of sound. He turned, and she was standing impossibly close, closer than before, her presence encompassing him. Her hand, slender and pale, reached out, hovering for a moment in the space between them, then settled lightly on his arm just above the elbow. It was a feather-light touch, delicate yet firm, but it sent a startling jolt through him, a spark that ignited a desperate longing he hadn't known existed, a current that coursed through his entire being. His skin tingled under her fingers, a sensitive nerve ending exposed to the cool air. "Alara?" His voice was hoarse, barely a sound, lost in the sudden intensity of her presence. Her eyes, those deep hazel pools, were wide and luminous in the dim light, reflecting the faint glow from the apartment, mirroring the silent yearning within him. There was an unspoken plea in them, a raw vulnerability that was almost unbearable to witness, a silent cry from the depths of her soul. "Stay, Caspian," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly, a tremor that resonated with his own pounding heart. "Just a little longer. I don't want to be alone tonight." The words were a cascade, tumbling over him, stripping away his carefully constructed defenses, shattering the fragile facade of composure he had tried to maintain. It wasn't a demand, not a forceful imposition, but a quiet, desperate plea, born of profound loneliness, of years spent in silent solitude. Every instinct screamed at him to refuse. She was older. She was his uncle's friend, a connection that implied a certain boundary. This was inappropriate. This was impossible. But the delicate touch of her hand, the profound, unspoken pain in her eyes held him captive, binding him to her. The sheer rawness of her vulnerability disarmed him, rendering him speechless, unable to resist. He looked at her hand on his arm, then back to her face. The lines of sorrow around her eyes seemed deeper now, more pronounced, etched by the burdens she carried. The thought of leaving her, alone in that quiet apartment with its ghosts and its silent piano, felt suddenly unbearable. An act of cruelty he couldn't commit. His carefully constructed resolve crumbled, dissipating like smoke. "Okay," he said, the word coming out as a breathless sigh. "A surrender." "Okay, Alara, I'll stay." A wave of palpable relief washed over her face, momentarily erasing the shadows of sorrow and anxiety. She didn't smile, not exactly, but her eyes softened and her hand tightened almost imperceptibly on his arm, a silent affirmation of his decision. She led him back into the living room, a silent invitation, a beckoning into her private world, and gestured towards the worn but comfortable armchair near the fireplace, its hearth cold and empty, a symbol of forgotten warmth. He sat down, feeling the soft upholstery beneath him, his body strangely heavy, weighted by the significance of the moment. She didn't sit opposite him, maintaining a polite distance. Instead, she moved to the piano, her movements slow and deliberate, almost reverent, as if she were stepping onto holy ground, a sacred space. His eyes followed her, mesmerized by her grace, by the quiet dignity of her presence. She ran her fingers over the dust-laden keys, a silent caress, a yearning touch. The air felt thick, heavy with unspoken emotions, with the echoes of music long silenced. He watched her, his breath held, anticipating, waiting. Would she play? Would the silent instrument finally sing? Would she speak of her pain again, opening herself further? She turned, her back to the piano, and faced him. The lamplight caught the subtle sheen of tears in her eyes, unshed but undeniably present, reflecting the quiet anguish within. Her arms crossed loosely over her chest, almost defensively, a shield against further vulnerability. "My husband, Julian," she began, her voice barely audible, a fragile whisper. "He loved this piano. He said it sang to him even when it was silent. He composed. He wrote the most beautiful pieces filled with light and joy. After he left, I couldn't bring myself to touch it. It felt like touching a ghost. Every note held a memory too painful to bear." The raw honesty of her confession was startling, stripping away layers of polite reserve. She was laying bare a wound not for pity, but for understanding, for a witness to her enduring pain. He simply listened, his gaze unwavering, offering the silent presence she seemed to crave, the quiet space for her grief to breathe. There were no facile words of comfort he could offer, no platitudes that could diminish such profound loss. Only stillness, and the profound aching empathy that bloomed in his chest. She continued, her voice gaining a fragile, almost defiant strength, as if speaking the words aloud gave them power. He died in a car accident 5 years ago, just gone. One moment he was there, filling this apartment with laughter and music, with his vibrant presence; the next, nothing but silence, a void, and I've been living in that silence ever since, Caspian, a self-imposed exile from joy, from anything that feels alive. Her voice broke on the last word, a quiet gasp, a sob caught in her throat. His heart ached for her, a sharp, sympathetic pang. The depth of her grief was a palpable thing, a heavy shroud draped over her existence, smothering the light. He wanted to reach out, to bridge the distance, to offer a tangible comfort, but he didn't know how. He was young, largely unscarred by such profound loss, his life yet untouched by such a searing wound. What could he offer to mend a soul so deeply broken? "It sounds incredibly painful, Alara," he managed, his voice rough with emotion, stripped bare by her honesty. She nodded, a single tear finally escaping the corner of her eye, tracing a shimmering path down her cheek, a silver tear in the lamplight. "It is. And the world, it expects you to move on, to heal, to put it behind you. But some wounds just never close. They just scab over, and you learn to live with the scar, to carry its weight." She walked slowly towards him, her gaze never leaving his, a silent, powerful invitation. She stopped just a few feet away, her presence overwhelming, filling the space between them with a quiet, almost suffocating intensity. The scent of lavender and rose petals, subtle before, now seemed to engulf him, warm and intoxicating, a fragrant cloud. He could see the faint tremor in her hands now, not just a subtle shake, but a tremor born of deep, profound emotion, of a soul laid bare. "And sometimes," she whispered, her voice raw with vulnerability, with an almost desperate honesty, "sometimes someone walks into your silence, into your carefully constructed solitude, and they bring with them a different kind of sound. Not music, not laughter, but something else. Something hopeful. Something that whispers of possibility. Her eyes, glistening with tears, searched his, a desperate plea in their depths, begging for understanding, for acceptance. Someone like you, Caspian, you don't judge, you just see. His gaze dropped to her trembling hands, then back to her eyes. The air between them was thick with unspoken feelings, a fragile, volatile energy, a current building to an unbearable intensity. The age difference, the impropriety, the internal alarms that had been blaring minutes ago now seemed distant, muted, drowned out by the overwhelming reality of the present moment. All that mattered was the profound vulnerability in her eyes, the desperate need for connection, for someone to truly see her. His heart was pounding, a frantic drum against his ribs, a wild, untamed rhythm. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, she raised her hand. It was the same hand that had rested on his arm, the same hand that had traced the piano keys, heavy with unspoken music. It hovered in the air for a moment, suspended between them, a moment pregnant with possibility. Then, with a delicate bravery that defied her fragile appearance, she reached out. Her fingers, cool and soft, brushed against his cheek, a feather-light touch that sent a shiver through him, a jolt of pure, unadulterated sensation. It was a touch full of tenderness, of a quiet, yearning desperation, a silent plea. He closed his eyes for a moment, leaning into the warmth of her hand, allowing himself to be consumed by the sensation. It felt like coming home, a safe harbor after a long, lonely journey. When he opened his eyes, her face was even closer. Her breath, soft and warm, ghosted across his lips, a silent caress. Her eyes were still wide, still vulnerable, still searching, asking, pleading. And in that moment, the world outside, the bustling city, his uncle, his responsibilities, the very fabric of his ordinary life, faded into an indistinct blur, a distant echo. All that existed was the two of them, suspended in a bubble of silent, desperate connection, a fragile, intimate universe of their own making. "Ilara," he breathed, the name a prayer, a whispered benediction, a recognition of something profound and undeniable. His hand, almost instinctively, reached up and covered hers, pressing it gently against his cheek, cementing the connection. Her fingers trembled beneath his, mirroring the tremor in his own soul. What happens now? No one expected. But it's what restores fairness. The air in the apartment crackled with a silent, volatile energy, a current more potent than any he had reconnected in the basement, more profound than any electrical charge. Ilara's hand, still pressed against his cheek, was a nexus of warmth, a delicate bridge between two souls teetering on the edge of a precipice, daring to look into the abyss of their connection. Her breath, so close, mingled with his, a silent confession of longing, a shared secret whispered into the night. In the hushed glow of the lamplight, her eyes, deepened by unshed tears and profound vulnerability, were fixed on his, searching, yearning, a vast open landscape of unspoken desires. The implicit question in their depths was a powerful, unspoken challenge, a silent dare. His thumb, almost unconsciously, stroked the back of her hand, a small, comforting gesture that spoke volumes where words failed. The contact, innocent yet deeply intimate, sent a jolt of something electric through his veins, a current of pure, unadulterated sensation. Every fiber of his being urged him closer, to erase the minuscule space between them, to answer the silent plea in her eyes, to surrender to the magnetic pull. But another part, the rational, cautious part of his mind, screamed at him to pull back, to remember the impossibilities, the insurmountable barriers. She was a woman burdened by immense loss, years his senior, a cherished friend of his uncle's. This was not just inappropriate, it felt almost sacrilegious to the quiet sorrow that defined her, to the memory of her lost husband. Yet the insistent warmth of her hand against his skin was a powerful counter-argument, silencing the clamor of his doubts. Her vulnerability, raw and unfiltered, was a magnet, drawing him in with an irresistible force. It wasn't about desire, not in the carnal sense, but about a profound, almost spiritual need for connection, for someone to witness her pain and not shy away, to simply be present in her solitude. He saw the depth of her loneliness, a chasm she had been navigating alone for too long, a silent burden she had carried in secret. And suddenly, his youthful inexperience felt less like a barrier and more like a blank canvas, unmarred by the complex narratives of her past, unsullied by the intricacies of adult relationships. He could offer a present moment, untainted by expectation or history, a fresh perspective. "Alara," he whispered again, his voice raspy, barely audible, yet imbued with a profound sincerity. You don't have to be alone." The words were simple, yet they carried the weight of everything he couldn't articulate, every nascent emotion swelling within his chest. They were a promise, a soft, tentative offer of solace, a hand extended in the darkness. A tiny, almost imperceptible tremor ran through her body, a shiver that spoke of both fear and relief. Her gaze didn't waver, but her eyes, still luminous with unspoken feelings, seemed to deepen, drawing him further into their depths, into the quiet, aching truth of her soul. Then slowly, infinitesimally, she leaned in. The scent of lavender and dried roses intensified, wrapping around him like a comforting shroud, a warm, familiar embrace. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic rhythm against the quietude of the room, a wild drumbeat echoing the tumultuous emotions within him. His muscles tensed, anticipating, yet strangely calm, poised on the edge of a silent revelation. It was as if time itself had dilated, each second stretching into an eternity, a breathless suspension. Her lips, soft and hesitant, brushed against his. It wasn't a demanding kiss, not passionate or urgent, not a Hollywood embrace. It was a sigh, a whisper, a gentle breath of shared vulnerability, a silent offering. It tasted of unshed tears and a quiet, profound hope, a longing that had been buried deep for too long. It was a kiss of silent acknowledgement, a fragile bridge built on shared pain and unspoken empathy, a silent communion. In that moment, the world outside, the bustling city, his uncle, his responsibilities, the very framework of his mundane existence, faded into an indistinct blur, a distant, irrelevant hum. There was only the gentle pressure of her lips, the soft brush of her hair against his temple, and the quiet, aching tenderness that bloomed within his chest, a delicate flower in the desolate landscape of her grief. Then, just as subtly as it began, it ended. She pulled back, barely an inch, but enough to break the physical contact. Her eyes, still wide and searching, remained locked with his, holding him captive. Her hand still cupped his cheek, her thumb now resting gently on his jawline, a lingering caress. The silence that followed was not empty, but heavy with the weight of what had just transpired, a silence charged with unspoken desires and profound understanding. It was a silence that spoke volumes, a powerful testament to the unspoken connection that had just solidified between them, an undeniable truth. Her voice, when it came, was a mere whisper, laced with a tremor that spoke of fear and profound truth, a battle within. "Don't do this, Caspian," she breathed, her gaze still unwavering, still holding his captive, her eyes pleading for him to understand. The words were a contradiction, a plea to stop even as her eyes and her hand on his face begged him to stay, to not let go. It was a desperate push-pull, a battle between the dictates of convention and the undeniable, aching yearning of her heart. The scent of lavender and roses, now mixed with a faint metallic tang of tears, filled the air around them, a bittersweet fragrance of nascent emotion. He looked into her eyes, seeing the internal struggle raging within her, the visible war between duty and desire. The age difference, the societal expectations, the phantom presence of her lost husband, all these antagonists were warring with the burgeoning, undeniable connection between them. But beneath the fear, beneath the self-recrimination in her eyes, he saw something else. A deep, undeniable desire for this fragile closeness, a hunger for something real and honest after years of silent suffering, a longing for touch, for understanding. His hand, which had been covering hers, now gently moved, his fingers intertwining with hers. A quiet declaration, a silent promise. He didn't speak. There were no words that could capture the complexity of the moment, no rational explanation for the magnetic pull that had drawn them together, for the profound shift in their shared